All right, everyone. Thanks for joining my session today. My name is Mike Davis, and we're going to be covering running BI workloads on Windows Azure virtual machines. So we're going to talk about the cloud today. We're going to talk about infrastructure, talk about infrastructure as a service and how that works, and basically the kind of the steps you would go through to get your BI workload up running on the cloud. So hopefully you've been keeping up with what's going on in the world of cloud. Lots of companies out there are working on this now. Amazon, of course, Microsoft, and several others have great cloud solutions out there now. So we're going to talk about, of course, Windows Azure, and we're going to talk about how you can actually run your BI solution up there in the cloud. So a little bit about me first. My name is Mike Davis. I'm a BI architect and a managing project lead with PragmaticWorks. And I've been author on about 5 SQL books. In fact, the newest one just came out. It's the Integration Services 2014 professional book. So you should go to Amazon right now and order that. In fact, I'll wait. Go ahead. Just kidding. All right. So that's a little bit about myself. And this is what we're going to cover today. So today we're going to talk about infrastructure as a service and some of the options that you have in Azure. For example, you have the options to use gallery images. So there are some images that are built into Azure that you can grab and use, and we'll show you how those work. You can also, we're going to talk about how you can run your BI workloads in a Windows Azure virtual machine. We're going to talk about how to use SQL Server virtual machines for your corporate BI scenarios in Azure. We're going to talk about how to use Azure with analysis services and reporting services. And we're going to talk about how to build your own fully customized BI environment up in Azure. And we're going to talk about how you can create your own images to make deployment easier in Azure. So we're not going to cover how to set up a complete SharePoint BI farm or any of the other typical install items that you would think about in a BI solution. People have been spinning up VMs for years and installing SharePoint for years, so no need for us to cover that. That's something that is done regardless of whether you're going to the cloud or not. We're just going to talk about how it actually incorporates into the cloud and into Azure and how those VMs work out there and how they're different, but not about how to actually set them up and install them like you would on a typical install. All right, so first let's talk about IaaS or IaaS. As I'm not sure if that's the proper way to pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced 3 different ways, so I'm going to say IaaS, or probably just say Azure here and there. But IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service. So what is Infrastructure as a Service? Infrastructure as a Service is any environment that allows you to host virtual machines without having to build and maintain the hosting infrastructure yourself. So there's a lot of corporate IT departments that take advantage of virtualization environments to run the workloads, but IaaS eliminates the need to install or maintain host servers, and it allows you to focus on just your VMs rather than the infrastructure around those VMs. In Windows Azure, IaaS is provided through the Windows Azure Virtual Service Machines out there. All right, so that is what IaaS is. Before we go any further, though, let's talk about what is in the BI stack. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions here. Now, normally I would do this in a room full of people and have people raise their hands. So what I'll do is I'll just ask the questions. I'll pause for a second, let you think of your answer, and you don't have to type in the chat room or the questions or anything like that. We'll end up blowing up the question room if we do that. So, but we'll just give you a chance to think about it, and then I'll give you 1 second to answer here. All right. So, is this part of the BI stack? Is analysis services part of the BI stack? Yes or no? Yes, of course it is. Yep. Analysis services is an important part of the BI stack. It's a tool used to do multidimensional tabular databases. What about the SQL Server engine itself, though? Is the SQL Server engine a part of the BI stack? Yes or no? So, I'll give you a second to think about that. All right, so as a consultant, I am required to say at least 3 times a day, it depends. So this is my one for the day here to start off. SQL Server as an engine, is it part of the BI stack? It depends. It depends on if you're actually using the engine in your BI stack. So for example, if I have my multidimensional cube out there and it's pulling from SQL Server and role that mode, then the engine is a big part of my BI stack. But if I've got, say, Power Pivot, and I'm just pulling data directly from flat files or some other location, or maybe I'm pulling from SQL Server, but I'm not really using the engine here. I'm just kind of querying the data and dropping it over into Power Pivot. Then really the engine is not a big part of my BI stack. Yeah, it's my source, but not really a big part of the BI stack in terms of the BI solution itself. So it could be, it could not be, depends on how you've got your BI solution set up. But in Azure, the SQL Server engine, of course, is a part of your BI stack for sure. All right, what else? SSRS, or reporting services. Is reporting services? Of course it is, yes. Reporting services, of course, that's if you're using it. It is a part of your BI stack for sure. Whatever reporting tool you're using is a part of your BI stack. What about Active Directory? Is Active Directory a part of your BI solution? What do you guys think? All right, that's another, it depends. If you're actually using Active Directory as a part of your authentication and your security in your BI stack, then yes, it's a big part of your BI solution. Active Directory can be used inside of Azure, and we'll talk about that, so it could be a part of your BI stack there also. What else here? What's the next item? SharePoint. It could be. If you're hosting on SharePoint, sure, of course that could be a part of your BI solution. It doesn't have to be, though. If you're just taking reports and basically dumping them out to a file share somewhere, and people get to those through SharePoint list or something like that, then SharePoint is the portal to get to those, but it's not really a part of your BI stack. It's just kind of the gateway people are using to get to it. It's not something you have to really plan for in your BI stack too much. Networking. Now, I'm not talking about Facebook or Twitter here. I'm talking about your actual networking, your cabling, your solutions, your LAN cards, everything that you're using to connect. Is that a part of your BI solution? Is it or is it not? Again, it depends. So if I'm working out in Azure, and Azure has got my network all set up for me, so I don't really have to worry about that. There's some networking you have to do, and I'll talk about that in Azure, some things you can set up with Affinity Groups, but we'll get into that in a moment. But on my solution in-house, my networking is my backbone for everything. If I don't have my network set up correctly, I can't even start building a BI stack. So networking is definitely a backbone for everything in your solution or in your in-house solution. But in the cloud, you kind of take that out. You don't have to worry about that so much. Is Office a part of the BI stack? 10 years ago, this may have been a big no. Now, yes, it's definitely a part of your BI solution. When you create a report and you put it out there, what are people grabbing and doing with that report most of the time? They're pulling it out. They're either putting it into a PowerPoint slideshow, or they're pulling it out and they're dropping it over into Excel and they're slicing and dicing it. In fact, now with the innovation of Power Pivot and all the new Power BI tools from Microsoft, you can open up Excel and basically start slicing and dicing data right away without having to worry about going through the traditional BI stack to get your solution. All right, so why do I ask all this? You need to know all this stuff here because when you're working in Azure, it's a little different. So, for example, you don't need to be an expert on networking, but you do need to know just enough about it so that you can talk to them and tell Azure what you need set up inside of it. You don't need to be your infrastructure guy, but you need to be able to talk to an infrastructure guy and know just enough about it to tell them what you need in terms of your solution. Your SharePoint, like for example, your SharePoint, you may need extra domain controllers for that. You may need machines on the same DNS, things like that. So there's a few questions that people are going to, your network guy may ask you. So networking is a part of your BI stack, especially if you want to consider yourself a BI architect, someone who actually can design the entire solution from the ground up. Azure is changing all the time, so just a caveat here going forward, Azure is changing all the time. In fact, I created this slide deck quite a while ago. I actually got it from one of the guys on the CAT team and kind of altered it to meet my needs here. In fact, some of these slides may be outdated already on some of the information I show you because Azure is changing all of the time. I tried to make sure it was updated this week, make sure I'm giving you all good information. But if I'm giving something old and I'm wrong, please call me out on it so I know. All right, so even the best practices. So because Azure is changing so much, because they're adding, say more hard drive space or different drives or different type of network connections inside of Azure, even the best practices that were thought of when Azure first came out have changed. So a lot of things I'm talking about here may be changing on you. So keep that in mind as I'm going through this. All right, so let's go on to my next slide here. So what is IaaS? So we already talked about this, what IaaS is. IaaS is it's infrastructure as a solution or as a service, and it is a location basically where you can persist virtual machines up in the cloud. So there are some platform images that are built in, or gallery images that are built into Azure that you can use, and of course you can create your own custom images and upload those out to Azure. And you can also size these to fit your needs. So inside of Azure here, you can go up to 8 cores and 56 gigs of RAM on those machines. You can decide the size of the hard drives that you need, and you pay for your Azure, of course, by time and also by the size of your machines. You get a dedicated virtual network, which is quite nice out there. We'll talk more about that in a little bit here. You can also have the option to link Azure to your corporate network. So your actual network that you're on, you want to link it to your own domain and use Active Directory across there, you can do that. All right, so let's go back and finish talking about this for a second. So really, infrastructure as a service is nothing more than a bunch of VMs. It's no different than the virtual machines that you host on your own location. It's just that they are persistent. They're not torn down and rebuilt like others out there on some other services. They're actually persistent out there in the cloud. The platform that they're built on is the server. You may have SharePoint also on there. If you need to ask for a new box out on Azure, they can have a box up and running for you very quickly. Just within a few minutes you can have a new box up and running. You can customize them, create your own VMs. You can use templates also. There's templates available to create those VMs. So if you create your own custom VM, you want to use that as a template to create new VMs afterwards, you can do that. Because of the size differences, you can actually purchase the size that fits your needs and pay based on that. I think it's an hourly rate. Actually, I think they changed it to a minute rate now, so it's actually priced by the minute. Plus features. So the more features you add on, the more expensive it gets out there in Azure too. I am not a sales guy. I'm not here to try to sell you on Azure, so I will not be going over what the prices are on that. That's something you'll have to talk to your Microsoft representative about. But it is not very expensive. They've actually cut the prices quite a bit here, and they're very competitive with other cloud solutions out there now. All right, so basically it's like this last bar here, this dedicated virtual network there. It's basically like a VPN in the cloud, basically. So you can join them to your domain just like a regular co-location center. Alrighty, so what are the elements of an IaaS implementation here? So first of all, let's talk about why you'd want to use IaaS, infrastructure as a service. There are several reasons why you want to run a workload up there. Most of the reasons are related to the benefits, of course, of getting solutions up in the cloud. And then some of them are reasons that are derived from the combination of advantages and characteristics of your BI solution. So, for example, you can have a seamless migration to the cloud. IaaS is the most accessible alternative for migrating BI workloads to the cloud because IaaS is very similar to your existing on-prem architectures. There's no physical infrastructure maintenance, which is great. So you put your items up there in Windows Azure, and all the physical infrastructure is taken care of for you. In-house, you may have to, if a hard drive fails, things like that happen, you're going to have to swap those out. There's lots of issues with physical work and physical infrastructure with any kind of in-house solution. With IaaS, you don't have to worry about that. So that is a huge part of it, is that the physical infrastructure is gone. The IaaS solutions are very flexible. So additional VMs can be created very quickly from either predefined solutions like the gallery images we talked about or your own custom images. You can deploy additional servers up there. You can increase capacity dynamically. All that can be done very quickly and very easily through the IaaS service. And the biggest part is your total cost. So your TCO, or your total cost accrued here, or total cost of ownership, you can reduce your TCO quite a bit here, because by accruing costs for only your consumed resources that you're using, and only your required SKUs and only your actual resource usage time that you're using, you can lower that TCO. So if you've got a box that you're setting up and you're having to maintain and run, but you're hardly not using it, this will give you a chance to basically create a box that's, if it's not hit very often, not used very often, then your costs can be significantly reduced here. This is also good for short-lived projects, such as if you're doing a big demo or proof of concept deployment, things like that. This works great for that, because now you can spin up the VM, spin up your Azure account, upload everything you need, get it set up, do your demo or do your proof of concept. Once things are done, tear it down, and you only pay for the time that you use that solution. So you didn't have to go out and buy new hardware, buy licenses from Microsoft or whatever other systems you're using, and it's very quick and easy to do. It's also good for development and testing, like labs and training. So if you've got some kind of workflow you're trying to develop, or some kind of training you're trying to do, and you need an environment set up for a very short period of time for that, this is a great way to do that. We use this here at PragmaticWorks. We actually have a SharePoint class that we teach, and that class we actually spin up a Azure VM for SharePoint, and so we're only paying for that Azure VM while the class is going on. After the class ends, of course, we don't have to worry about that anymore. We can actually just turn off that. Now the slides aren't stuck, so I'm just kind of stuck here for a second because I'm waiting to finish talking about the recommendations here before I move on. Sorry. So what are the elements of IaaS here, and why would you want to go out there and use it? The first thing you have to have is a subscription. So your subscription is the main thing. It covers all of everything inside of IaaS. So the first thing you have to have is a subscription. Everything that you buy, everything you do inside of your Azure account must be inside of your subscription. So if you have two subscriptions, you really aren't going to cross across those subscriptions. That's an important part of this. If you plan on using, maybe you got two different locations or two different groups in your company, and you're getting Azure accounts, it's probably a good idea to have just one subscription for that. Even if you don't plan on those things being tied together, put them in one subscription, and now you have the ability to tie them together in the future if you want to or need to. So what would you do to tie those together? Affinity groups. So affinity groups are basically, you can think of it as a group of resources that ensure things are together in Azure. So let me go into that a little more here. So affinity groups is a logical grouping of resources that you define in your Azure account. So when storage and virtual machines are grouped into affinity groups, what they do in the Azure Center is they make sure that those resources are located close to each other physically in the data center. This helps maintain or minimize, this helps minimize latency, and it helps improve speed. And it's important to locate your virtual machines and storage close together physically, because the VHDs, the virtual hard disk, are used by the virtual machines, are stored in blobs in Windows Azure storage. So yes, so everything in the background, basically what you see running out in Azure are just VHD files. If you're familiar with running Hyper-V or whatever your solution is for virtual machines in your physical location, that's basically what's happening here out in Azure. VHDs are getting set up and running in the Azure location. So affinity groups, make sure you can think of that as basically I'm grouping these things together, I'm going to be using them together, and so those disks can be located in one location. You can have multiple affinity groups under a subscription. So if I've got a complete BI solution in one affinity group, and maybe in some other solution I have, a web app database that's being used. It's separate from my BI solution. It's not really a part of that. I could be in a separate affinity group. So you can have multiple out there. What is inside of an affinity group? Your storage. So your storage is, just like I just said, VHD files. So this is where your virtual machine lives. So when you think of storage inside of Azure, just think of a VHD file. What else is out there? Your network. So you have a virtual network that's dedicated to you. You have subnets, etc. All the other items you would think of inside of your network are available inside of Azure. So you actually set those services up in Azure. I'll show you some screenshots of Azure here in a few minutes. Cloud services. So this is basically a bucket and a gateway that can hold different VMs, public IP addresses, public DNS entries, everything that you allow to be seen can be pushed out to your cloud service here. You can have 10 virtual machines and only allow one visible out there through either HTTPS or HTTP or some other port. So your cloud services basically allow you to control that. You can control what can be seen and what can be used out there in your Azure account. And what's inside your cloud services? Your virtual machines, of course. So, just like your virtual machine in your local, your physical location, your virtual machines out there work the same way. They're VHD files, and they are just like an on-prem VM. Nothing special about those. You're just controlling the access to them through cloud services now. And the last one is your availability set. This is like 2 machines are part of one group. Then you don't take them both down. So, for example, let's say I've got 2 machines, and during patching, which by the way Microsoft does periodic patching of machines, and I want to make sure that, say, 2 machines don't go down at the same time because they're part of a solution that needs to be up. Then Microsoft will say, okay, this is an availability set. We can't take them all down at one time. We've got to make sure that these are up and running. So availability sets basically allow you to say when Microsoft can and can't take down items and which ones they can take down at the same time when they're doing patches and things like that. All right. So that is basically the elements of IaaS out there and Azure. All right. So there are gallery images out there in IaaS. So what are gallery images? Gallery images are basically templates, or basically images that already are created by Microsoft that are out there that you can use. There's quite a few of them out there that are available for you to grab and use. Those images are ones that basically have setups already done in them, like SharePoint environments, SQL Server environments, etc., etc. Those things are already set up in those images, and you can use those. So most of the gallery images have SQL Server installed and running. Many of the features that are needed for BI solutions are covered in there also. It just helps you simplify an installation there. So you don't have to go through the installation of those items. The configuration procedure still has to be done, though, on a lot of items like reporting services. Leveraging the gallery images that have SQL Server already installed does not allow you to make use of your existing licenses, though. So the process is that you have to assume that you're going to supply a license. It is not true. You'll need to actually get licenses for those Azure gallery images that are out there. So you'll be paying for those, basically, like I said earlier, by the hour on Azure. All right, so let's move along here. So what is in those gallery images? So there's quite a few gallery images out there. These are they've actually increased the size of these recently. They're up to 127 gigs on the C drive now in these gallery images. They have multiple SQL Server editions, so you can get an Enterprise Edition gallery image, you can get a Standard Edition, and you can get the Web Edition. I'm not going to go over what's involved in each one of those. Those are license questions that are independent of whether you run it on Azure or not. And storage options. So your storage options are based on the size of your VM. So if you've got a very large VM that you're putting out there, your storage options, you may want to use something like the D drive that's out there, which I'll talk about that in a moment here, and some other drive availabilities that you have. You can actually increase the size of those drives and actually add on disk if you'd like. And we'll talk about that in a second. BI tools installed by default. Okay, so SQL Server Analysis Services is installed in multidimensional mode by default, and SQL Server Reporting Services is installed in native mode by default. So a couple of, and the last one here, the SQL Server install media is on the C drive too. So it's there, you can actually run back through it. All right, so how does this work? Why would you care about this? So first of all, I want to let you know that on top of that C drive, you get a D drive out there on your Azure box, but it is a temporary drive. Do not store anything on that D drive that is important to you, not even for a moment, because at any point in time, you could have a disk loss in Azure, and Microsoft would move your machine from one drive to another. And when they move your drive, they just move your C drive. They do not move your D drive. and your D drive would be lost. So any temporary files that you had on there are considered that, just temporary, and can be removed at any point in time. So do not store anything on your D drive that you want to be kept for long periods of time. It's great for temp items only. All right, so the number of disks that you can attach varies based on what you purchase. But if you purchase the largest items out there on Azure, you can actually get up to 16 terabytes, even on a single drive letter. So you can just keep adding on disk basically inside of Azure and get up to 16 terabytes of space on one drive. The install for analysis services is done in multidimensional mode. You can install the tabular mode. So the install media is available on the C drive, so you basically walk back through that, and you can install that in tabular mode now instead of in the just multidimensional. And the last one there, the reporting services. So reporting services is installed on there, but it is not configured. You will have to go through the regular configuration. The configuration works just like you would back in an on-prem example. And you pay, and again, you pay by the hour for the OS and for the SQL Server you have installed. All right, I see a bunch of questions coming in here on the chat room here. Let me answer some questions here. Oops. There we go. Let's see. All right, can you configure SkyDrive to work with Azure? Actually, it's called OneDrive now. It says SkyDrive, and I believe you can connect to Azure with it, but it's not really something you'd want to do. You definitely want to tie it into your BI solution. OneDrive is not really meant for that. Previously called SkyDrive. Will BI tools installed by default regardless of SQL edition? Ooh, good question. No, I believe if you yes, yeah, I think if you pick the standard edition, I believe a standard edition does not come with some of the BI tools, and so no, you're not going to get some of those things installed. I have to check on that. I have to bring up the licenses here. I'll admit right now I don't know a lot about standard edition because all of my clients here at Pragmatics use Enterprise. I hardly ever have anybody on standard edition or any other edition besides Enterprise. All right, good question. So let's move on here. So we talked about gallery images here. This is a screenshot of one of the dashboards here. This is just one. I grabbed this again from TechEd presentation that Chuck did back last year and TechEd. So this is basically just a kind of a list of all of the VMs that he has here on his box. So I've got a bunch of VMs here that I can go and I can connect to. And there's a little dashboard here that shows on the front screen my CPU percentage, disk read writes, etc., etc. So I have a little charts here showing me this, and also shows me my cores being used. I'm only using 26% of my 300 cores I have available on this. Only 8 cores is what I'm using right now. So a little dashboard comes up here, and these images here that I've uploaded, these could have been gallery images, or they could have been my own custom images here. I believe these are gallery images here that we grabbed and uploaded. All right, so when you are selecting a virtual machine operating system, you can actually pick from SQL Server versions here and Windows servers here. So here's my platforms, here's my operating systems I can pick from. So here's Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server 2012 on the right here. So I'm paying for that Windows Server 2012 license. I'm getting that out there. Pricing information varies based on your subscription you get here. But basically I'm paying for Windows Server 2012, so I don't have to go out and buy a Windows Server 2012 license here for this, which is quite nice. Oops. And or I can use Windows Server 2008 R2. I think this is actually going away now. I think next month or the month after. Windows Server 2008 R2 and actually SQL Server 2008 R2. The support of those is going to be going away in the near future. I know SQL Server 2008 R2, the support for that is stopping in a couple of months here. I'm not sure about Windows Server 2008. I think that's still going to be supported for a while. But eventually these will be going away, and your only options will be 2012 and 2014. Alrighty. So there we go. So if I select SQL Server 2012 here, again, I get the SQL Server 2012 SP1 here, and again, your price varies based on what you select here inside of that. So after you've been running a VM for a while, here you can see what the dashboard changes to. So I can see kind of my disk reads here, my CPU percentages, and what's going on out in my server, who's hitting it. Again, you're paying per time that's being used, so watching this and seeing who's using it and who's hitting it is important. We talked about earlier the cloud services that runs on top of Azure. And if you look down here, there's my public virtual IP address. So that's the public IP address to my Windows Azure account here. That does not mean that I'm actually allowing my reporting services or my analysis services or any of these other items out there through that IP address. That I would set up and through my cloud services over on the left here in the picture of this little cloud. So if I do click on that little cloud icon here, I can go in and I can set up and tell it exactly what I want available. So I can go into endpoints here, and these are only the items that I've opened up here. And so it starts out here, just my RDP is open here, my TCP protocol is open, and my private port, that's it. But I can go ahead and add, and you see down here I have an HTTP here I've added, and that is my port 80. So I went ahead and added that in so I can get access to my reporting services out there. So I'm opening up reporting services on the end here. So this is, I can still use SQL Server Management Studio. I can still use SQL Server Data Tools now. Reports are deployed out there like you normally deploy reports, but instead of the location being on your local machine or on your on-prem box, now it's going to be http:// Azure Report Server, whatever your report server name is in your Azure box, which you can set up or change. All right, so the gallery images have all of these tools installed here. You see SQL Server, everything is set up here, reporting services, integration, analysis, etc., etc. So all of these tools are installed when you run a gallery image, which is nice. So you don't have to go and set all these up, which is great. And they're configured with the NT service account, local services accounts here. So if you want to change those, you can, but those are all the defaults that are set up inside of here. So that being said, though, reporting services is not configured. Reporting services is installed in file-only mode. So I'm not going to go deep into that because that's kind of beyond the scope of Azure, but reporting services is installed in files-only mode. So you need to go through and set it up like you would any other reporting services configuration. You have to create an endpoint for it, though, just like I showed earlier, to make sure that people can connect to your reporting services location out there in the cloud. So that being said, opening up those ports is not something you do lightly. So if you're not sure which port you should open and what kind of dangers you're opening up, if you're not the network admin and the network admin is trusting your Azure account out there, you may want to have a conversation with your network admin and tell them, hey, I'm going to be opening up this port. And if his head explodes, you know that you've got some issues. So you've got to make sure that you're having those conversations with your network admin, that you're talking through that. You're not just opening up ports left and right out there on your Azure account. Hopefully your network admin is involved with the Azure setup and is helping control some of the security out there when you work off in the cloud. All right. All right, so using the SQL Server Gallery images for BI. So basically the pro that you get here is instead of having to create an image, install SQL Server, do all this setup, is that you basically get an image, you just grab it and put it out there and you're done. That's the pro of it. The con of it is set up already with a lot of basic features and default features. And so if you are one of the kind of people who like to go in and tweak every little feature and every little setting inside of SQL Server, it may be easier to do that on your own machine and upload it versus using a gallery image. So you can actually use the BI in the cloud without the gallery images. That's right. We'll call it the Bring Your Own Image, BYOI. Bring your own image out there. So you can actually take a virtual machine that you've pre-built on site, and you can run a sysprep on it to reuse it. You can actually use non-sysprep images if you only have a single instance that you're running out there. But basically, you can prep them using sysprep and upload them out to your Azure VM. You're just basically moving the virtual hard drive, the VHD file out there to that location, to your Azure site. So what does that do? Your physical machine is converted to virtual. You can use a P2V for that. If you're not familiar with that, I would just do a quick web search on that. P2V is basically how you can take a physical machine and convert it to a virtual machine. After that conversion, you upload your Azure account. So if you've got a bunch of machines in your location right now and you want to get those up in Azure, but you think it's going to be a pain, Not so much. You can run the P2V, convert your physical machine to a virtual one, and then boom, upload it to Azure, and you're up and running. So if your virtual machines are slowing down on you, or you're thinking about upgrading, and you're thinking about buying a bunch of new hardware, and the cost effectiveness of using Azure weighs out for you, but you'll have to do some research on that to see if it's very cost effective for you, then great. Run the P2V, get those things converted, and get them uploaded out to Azure. All right, and your other option here is you can actually build the virtual machine in Azure from the Windows Server gallery images. So you can actually go out there and take a template and basically run it and create your own virtual machine out there in Azure itself. You don't have to do it on your own machine and upload it, so you can build that natively inside of Azure. If you want to use a template machine multiple times, SysPrep does just about everything that you need, especially since 2012. All right. Bring your own license for SQL Server. So you can bring your own license if you have your own virtual machine that you pre-built on site and you're uploading it. Then now, yes, you can use your own license for SQL Server with that. So if you've already purchased a license and you decide you want to use it out in Azure, then yes, bring your own image is probably the way to go for you. If you're planning on upgrading to 2012 and getting a new license already, then no need for that. Just you can use the gallery images and upload your BI solution to your gallery image instead of, and then take advantage of the pricing out there on Azure instead of using your license you already have, or buying a new license that you would try to transfer over. So your storage options are based on the size of your virtual machine. I won't go too much into that, but basically if you've got a very large virtual hard disk that you're trying to upload, then of course your storage options are going to change based on those. And there's a ton of different options available inside of Windows Azure. All right, so moving a BI image to Azure, how hard is that to do? Quite easy, actually. There are some, I don't have an Azure image up and running that I can connect to today. Unfortunately, our Azure site is down today, so I'm not able to show that. But I was able to grab some screenshots and show you kind of what it looks like here. But basically, moving it from a BI image from your local machine up to Azure is quite easy. In your Azure account, there is an option to select the virtual machine operating system. And if you select My Disk, you'll see there's no disk over here. And there's a GUI that you can click on under My Disk here to upload your Azure account. So create image from a VHD. So basically, you select your VHD location here and upload it. You can also select down below there, says I have run SysPrep on this virtual machine, yes or no. If not, Azure is going to run it for you here internally. And you get a new VHD. You can do that instead of using PowerShell. Now that being said, PowerShell is considered the best practice. I know what you're thinking, what, really, PowerShell? Yes, PowerShell is getting more and more popular, especially with Azure. There's a ton of things you can do, and PowerShell is not that difficult. There's a ton of items out there that you can run in PowerShell. There's a lot of scripts that you can just grab out on the web and copy and paste over into your PowerShell screen and run. Basically changing the names of the locations here in your Affinity Groups or whatever. And so the running PowerShell is not that difficult in the background. But if you're adverse to using PowerShell, you'd rather get away from that, then you can do it using the GUI here that's built into Azure. All right, so easy to upload there, no issues there. All right, so how do you build a BI farm in Azure? So we talked about all these virtual disks and uploading things and creating gallery images or grabbing gallery images and using them. So what all else is involved in this? So the big thing is a BI farm. So I've got this image out there. I've got these few images. What do I need to do with them? If you remember in the beginning, I talked about affinity groups. That's an important part of this. But first you need to have your defined network. You need to define your controllers, define your SSRS installed, your AS installed, everything all set up, ready to go. And it's all done in Azure. Everything's done all inside the Azure network here. If you're doing a scale out like a SharePoint farm, great. Have your VM set up for that, installed, SharePoint up and running. Your VM that you used to do, they work just like you would do it back in SharePoint on a local box. You're still going to select the location of where those are at. So another big important part here, Affinity Groups, going back to that. So here I've got an Affinity Group. I've told it, okay, my reporting services server, my SharePoint server, my analysis services server, my integration services server, all my servers that I have set up out here in Azure are all part of one Affinity Group, and that's going to make sure that all those VMs are together, close physically in the Azure farm, or on the VHDs are very close together, stored in blob storage. So the address space cannot be changed when you do this. You cannot change the address space of these, which is good. You want them to be together on the same address space there. And then networking is now part of the BI. You need to be able to talk about networking again. You don't need to be a network expert, but now it basically makes sure that these items are together, and your networking should be taken care of for the most part, except for opening up reports like we talked about, and subnets and things like that, and then make sure those are set up. So that is about it for my talk today. I wish I had a demo. I wish my Azure site was up and running so I could actually show you guys a demo of some of this. But that is pretty much what we had to cover today on Azure. A few more things that I could add here. There are some white papers that you can download. I'm going to show you an example of one right here. Let me open it up. Here we go. So deploy SQL Server Business Intelligence in Windows Azure Virtual Machines. This is a white paper by Chuck Heinzelman, who I know personally. He's one of the SQL Cat team. Met him a couple times. Super nice guy. He did basically the same talk last year past, so I'd like to thank him for letting me copy and paste his blog and his information. But this is a white paper that basically walks you step by step through deploying out your Azure account. It goes over the Affinity Groups. It goes over your virtual networks, DNS and subnets. Goes over things in detail here. So basically, if you enjoyed the talk you had today and you're looking to learn more about this, then take a look at these items here, in this white paper here that is out there. I'll put a link in the chat here where you can download this. Or actually, I'm going to post it on my blog later today about this talk, and I'll put a link out there for you. But you can do a search for this. You can find it also. All right, so we've got a question here. Let's see. How's the connection via WAN between Azure and on site? Are there any customizations options such as selection of WAN services, provider, variations? Okay, so that's a good question. So basically, the connection with your WAN in your local machine, you basically think of it as a VPN. That's basically what you have. It is a virtual private network out in the cloud. You set up your domain, you set up your Active Directory, everything, and it's basically like a co-location. So if you're setting up a regular co-location out somewhere on another physical location, that is where you would you set up your virtual private network. It works the exact same way in Azure. Now you don't have to connect like that. You don't have to set up Azure on your VPN. You can actually use Azure just as a separate location. It has its own IP address, etc. And so you don't have to use a VPN, but if you're trying to connect up to your local connection there, then it's going to be through a VPN there. Okay. Do you recommend running SQL Server, SSA, SSRs on one VM or spreading them out to multiple? Okay, so good question, Chet. So should I put them all on one VM or spread them out? That is the same question that you would ask if you were doing it on site somewhere. So when you spread items out like that, you're going to be using different virtual machines, so you're going to be using a different set of CPUs, different sets of memory, and it depends on, again, there's my it depends for being a consultant. So it depends on how much workload you're putting on those CPUs and on those machines, and things like network I/O, all the same questions you would ask about your SQL Server for your on-prem solution, the same questions you're going to ask about your Azure one. If I've got a reporting service server out there, my VM, and I've tried to put analysis services on that same box, and I've got cubes processing all day long, and I got a cube that's reprocessing every 5 minutes, and it's just eating up my CPU, and my reporting server is just bogging down because of all that CPU loss, then yeah, maybe I want to separate those out to two machines. But that's going to be a question for you when you actually start. If you basically have to track the network activity. That little chart I showed a while ago. You know, you're maxing out your CPUs or you're maxing out your I/O. What's happening there on your disk? Good question. what do you think about performance of a VM when compared to the BI stack running on corporate servers? Okay, so performance on the VM compared to the BI. You are going to see some performance loss. Yes, it's a virtual machine, so things are getting converted left to right inside there. But the virtual machine technology has gotten so much better in the last 10 years that it is very, very it's very, very small in terms of what the loss you'll see there. The VM loss that you see is very small. A lot of times what I hear people say, well, I used a VM, but it was really, really slow. But you go look at it and it's like, okay, but that VM that you were running, one, didn't have the same amount of memory, didn't have the same disk size. They had it configured incorrectly. They had it running on a machine that had a very slow disk. You know, there's lots of issues there that can come up. So typically speaking, you don't see a big difference there in those. All right. Next question. I have a link for the white paper. Okay, hold on one second. Let me get you a link to the white paper here. I'll drop it in the chat room here. Give me 1 second. It'll take me just a moment to pull that up. Sorry, give me 1 second here. Let me grab that. I'll copy that over for you. All right. And let's see, where's the chat room at? You guys can only see the question room, can you? We're going to put this where you guys can see this.
Mike, we'll be taking your top 5 questions, so we'll post that on our Pragmatic Works blog page. Hopefully, maybe by beginning of next week. So we can always put it out there.
Okay, great. I just put it out there in the chat room also too. So.
Okay, perfect. And as a reminder, everyone, our sessions are recorded. We did have somebody in the box drop a question that they were having some connectivity problems. So yes, our sessions are recorded and will be made available by the end of the week.
Good. All right. So you got a few more questions here. Let me finish these up here. Let's see. Link for the white paper. I just put that in there. Is the Azure BI Stack at par with the standalone versions in terms of functionality? Yes and no. You can accomplish the same things, but you have to go around them a little bit differently. So, for example, when SQL Server Management Studio, when you're connecting to your Azure account in there, you lose some of the right-click and select top 1,000 functionality and things like that. So a few things here and there are not there, but they're all just little nice-to-haves. But in terms of functionality, can it do the same thing? Yes. Sometimes it takes a few extra commands typed in to make it happen. Can BI on Microsoft Azure connect to Hadoop or some other unstructured data source? Yes. So just like you can connect to Hadoop on a regular Microsoft BI stack, you can connect to Hadoop in Azure also. Was having trouble with sound connectivity. Okay, sorry about that. Is there any SCOM monitoring available for Windows Azure? That's a good question. I don't know if there's any SCOM monitoring available. I'd have to look into that and see. Good question. Good question there, DK.